it's times like this when genuinely, I think rather than doing all the finger pointing that I'm seeing people in the media and people online doing, being like, well, this is directly Biden's fault. This was before Biden. This is Trump's fault. He signed the papers. You know what? Even before Trump came along, there was fucking Obama. Hey, is anyone going to mention Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, the architects of this entire mess? Come on, they're the ones we should be pointing the fingers at. Who is to blame? Who is to blame? Who is to fucking blame? If we're going to be doing this big old thing that we always do, the saber rattling, the swinging dick competition, we should be doing it right now for refugees. Okay, so which country is going to take in the most refugees by ratio of their population, by ratio of their resources, by ratio of what they can handle right now? That should be the new competition. That's how we should frame this. Because yes, it is absolutely heart-wrenching for anyone to see what is happening. People so desperate to leave these conditions. And yes, the Taliban will be horrifying and atrocious for the conditions of women who are living there. There is no question about that either. So that should be the next big competition. And in the same way I say that about why, instead of instigating and starting these brand new wars all around the world, why don't we unify against the problems that we already have? And this would be a very big one. So if you truly want to show that you are the mightiest in the land, the Sigma male, if you've got that Sigma mindset, if you're ready to grind, okay, then get your country to accept as many refugees as possible. Help them out in a time like this. Welcome. Well, not muted. This is good. This is great. Emmanuel Macron is a monster. I will agree with this take. Oh, from Mr. Snowden. Macron vows EU initiative to protect against migrant flows from Afghanistan. Oh, protect against migrant flows. That's a nice way of saying it, eh? We want to make sure they don't come here. So, we'd rather just keep doing colonialism all around the world, but not deal with all the messes they make and not have people come over here. Come on, that's a little wild. Just want to quickly hear what Biden has to say about all this.
Today.
Oh, by the way, can I just say this to maybe some of my younger viewers? I don't know how young you all are. Most of the audience usually skews around the 27 age to 30s, I think, for the people who watch me. But there are some Zoomers amongst you who may not have been as young as I was when the war in Afghanistan, or should I say the war on terror, officially launched. I believe I was around 17 when the towers fell, and we got George Bush going on the screens and telling us that you're all with us or against us, and that this was done by Osama bin Laden, and that he's a very bad person, and that he could be hiding in Afghanistan, so we justifiably need to go there to get rid of him. And all of us were on board. We're like, well, yeah, this was a horrible, horrifying event, and it seems like Osama bin Laden did do it, and also a lot of Saudi Arabians for some reason. Mostly Saudi Arabians. It seems most of them were, and it turns out he was actually in Pakistan at the time. But yes, we did go into Afghanistan. Afghanistan, a place that other empires had gone before, like the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union was in Afghanistan, of course, it was some resources and training from the Americans that ended up helping to fund and create other organizations in that region. I think I'm giving some spoiler warnings to what we're going to be talking about today, but it's been a long time. It's been a long, horrible time for the Afghani people, for everyone involved, really, for soldiers as well, for just human suffering on a mass scale. And now the withdrawal, being as swift and immediate as it is resulting in a Taliban takeover of the region, which, of course, is probably one of the worst case scenarios for people on the ground in terms of people wanting to have, let's say, a liberation from a caliphate, because they are now going to be engaged in one. It's something that it doesn't matter what side of the political aisle you're on. Doesn't matter if you're a lefty like myself, a liberal, a conservative. It's devastating and it's heartbreaking. And it's not something in which there's going to be an easy answer. There's going to be a lot of, we shouldn't have done that. And that's not just the Americans. That's the Canada. That's the NATO as well. There's going to be a lot of that. There's going to be a lot of, we should probably do this as well. And at this point, with things evolving as quickly as they are into chaos, one of the biggest prescriptions I could make is that countries that have the ability to do so would open their arms to allow refugees into the countries. I know Canada just pledged to take in 20,000. The UK is pledging to take in far more. That's something that I think politicians, pundits, radio personalities, media, everything, that's something that you should be focusing on as well. But let's see what Biden has to say about all this.
To the unfolding situation in Afghanistan. The developments that have taken.
By the way, I'm catching up on all this. I've been on a ferry most of the day, so I'm not actually completely abreast of the scenario. So if someone here is going to be like, well, yeah, Lance, obviously, that happened like 2 p.m. I don't know yet. So no spoilers.
Place in the last week, and the steps we're taking to address the rapidly evolving events. My national security team and I have been closely monitoring the situation on the ground in Afghanistan and moving quickly to execute the plans we had put in place to respond to every constituency, including and contingency, including the rapid collapse we're seeing now. I'll speak more in a moment about the specific steps we're taking, but I want to remind everyone how we got here and what America's interests are in Afghanistan. We went to Afghanistan almost 20 years ago with clear goals. Get those who attacked us on September 11, 2001, and make sure al-Qaeda could not use Afghanistan as a base from which to attack us again. We did that. We severely degraded al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. We never gave up the hunt for Osama bin Laden, and we got him. That was a decade ago. Our mission in Afghanistan was never supposed to have been nation building. It was never supposed to be creating a unified, centralized democracy. Our only vital national interest in Afghanistan remains today what it has always been, preventing a terrorist attack on America's homeland. I've argued for many years that our...
So again, can you picture what that speech would be like flipped if someone was saying that about America? If someone was like, you know, we invaded America, we bombed it, we depleted it, we've let a lot of counterinsurgencies grow up, we've actually destroyed certain areas, and then we've hired defense contractors in order to exploit those areas and then rebuild them to a certain degree. But our point in America was never to do nation building. We weren't there to spread freedom or things like that. I mean, at the end of the day, we were there to make sure that America doesn't attack us in any way, shape, or form like they did previously. So that was our purpose in being there.
Our mission should be narrowly focused on counterterrorism, not counterinsurgency or nation building. That's why I opposed the surge when it was proposed in 2009 when I was vice president. And that's why as president, I'm adamant that we focus on the threats we face today in 2021, not yesterday's threats. Today, the terrorist threat has metastasized well beyond Afghanistan. Al-Shabaab in Somalia, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, al-Nusra in Syria, ISIS attempting to create a caliphate in Syria and Iraq, and establishing affiliates in multiple countries in Africa and Asia. These threats warrant our attention and our resources. We conduct effective counterterrorism missions against terrorist groups in multiple countries where we don't have permanent military presence. If necessary, we'll do the same in Afghanistan. We've developed counterterrorism over-the-horizon capability that will allow us to keep our eyes firmly fixed on the direct threats to the United States and the region, and act quickly and decisively if needed. When I came into office, I inherited a deal that President Trump negotiated with the Taliban. Under his agreement, U.S. forces would be out of Afghanistan by May 1, 2021, just a little over 3 months after I took office. U.S. forces had already drawn down during the Trump administration from roughly 15,500 American forces to 2,500 troops in country. And the Taliban was at its strongest militarily since 2001. The choice I had to make as your president was either to follow through on that agreement or be prepared to go back to fighting the Taliban in the middle of the spring fighting season. There would have been no ceasefire after May 1.
So I see people in chat saying that we were just there for the oil. No. I would maybe, if you want to use that kind of just like wide, broad stroke, you can apply that more to Iraq, for example, than you could Afghanistan. What's interesting about all this, though, is, again, this was the start of something new, whereas traditional wars, as they take place, they're usually between two factions, nation states, if you will, and it's very easy to identify them. You've got the Korean War, who are the allies in that case, World War II, the Axis versus the allies, when you can actually pinpoint that we're going to be attacking the Japanese, we're going to be attacking the Germans. When you're doing an occupation, and it's a war of ideology, such as the war on terror, for example, what you're actually going up against are called insurgents. And insurgents can just be everyday people, like you probably might be if you were in a country that has been invaded by a domestic force, sorry, a foreign force that is coming in, invading your land. All of a sudden, you may become something known as an insurgent. It is very difficult, if not impossible, to defeat insurgent armies. Especially in Afghanistan, the reason it's become such a graveyard time and time again is how mountainous the terrain is. Incredibly mountainous terrain, tons of regions for caves and guerrilla warfare to take place, very demoralizing, of course. And the United States, as Joe Biden has basically laid out here, not interested in doing nation building itself, but more interested in propping up their own form of government and then trying to get that government to be self-sustaining was, I guess, in essence, a recipe for disaster. Again, no matter how you look at this, no matter what side of the political aisle you're on, you should be aware that it is heartbreaking what is going to be happening to the Afghani people. I want to listen a little bit to Mark Preisner and see what his take was.
A little bit of background on yourself. I mean, you're a filmmaker. You are a producer and writer for the Empire Files.
Like a mass movement of soldiers at that time. So as soon as the Iraq war started, you know, there was a real upsurge of people in the active duty military who became opposed to the war and then became activists against it. So I'm just like a product of that generation. That's been true the Vietnam War, pretty much every war the US has fought. There's been a sector of the military that has turned against it. So I'm just one of many who, you know, went through that experience.
Yeah. So I wanted to have you on for obvious reasons today to talk about what's going on in Afghanistan.
Such a serious topic, obviously. You know, there's not going to be a lot of room for comedy here, everybody. But what's the shirt? All I can see is I lubricate. I lubricate guns. Is that it? I think I'm missing something out. Oh wait, that's that weird shirt he got from a fan or something, right? I think I saw that on Twitter. With liberal cum. Got it. Oh, it's a man shirt. It's a manly shirt, you know.
Afghanistan. But I just wanted to give, like, you know, a little bit of background information because there's a lot of new people here. Many people say I'm the gateway to leftist thought. So there's a lot of baby leftists in here. So I just wanted to give a little bit more background. You're an organizer with the PSL as well, right? You are an avowed socialist. Out and about.
Yeah, and actually, you know, that's the funny story. Like, I got out of the army in 2005. I was really mad about the war. I felt really betrayed, lied to, that everything was bullshit that I was told going in, lied to about the Iraq war. And, you know, I came back, you know, really angry, and I didn't realize at the time, but there was like this massive anti-war movement in the streets. And I immediately, you know, that drew me in. So I started organizing like car caravans from Florida to go to Washington, D.C. for these, you know, like the demonstrations were huge, like 100,000 people, 200,000 people would be marching on Washington, marching on the Pentagon to end the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And but it wasn't enough for me to like go to the demonstrations. I wanted to like, who's organizing these? And the PSL was one of the groups that I saw being kind of really at the forefront of organizing those actions and mobilizing people with a group called the Answer Coalition. And so that's, you know, that was my gateway in. I felt wasn't enough for me to just show up. I had to try to get other people out. And that kind of defined my life for the next long time.
So you listened to the Joe Biden speech, as we all did, I assume.
Yeah.
What did you think about it overall? Let's get started on that.
I mean, I agree with your reaction that he actually, you know, he held strong. He said, we're going to end the war regardless of the consequences. We're going to get out. And that was good. I mean, it's funny because all of these people that have been like praising Donald Trump when he was in office as like the most anti-imperialist president we ever had. If Donald Trump was still president now and he stood up and gave that speech, there'd all be these headlines: Donald Trump, the anti-imperialist president, the establishment's trying to stop him from ending the war, all this stuff. I'm sure they're not going to be saying that about Biden. But I think
the liberal media, on the other hand, probably still would be mercilessly ripping into Donald Trump in a similar capacity to how they're ripping into Joe Biden right now, saying that like he's horrible and, you know, he's personally responsible for everything that's going on in Afghanistan. It's been really surprising seeing that. Not really surprising. Of course, we know that the mainstream media has a massive a boner for warmongering, obviously. But certainly Fox News, you're right, would be talking about how incredible it is that he is, you know, a peaceful dove.
All right, let's learn a little bit about what exactly is the Taliban. How were they created?
And now the Americans are going home.
It's time to end the forever war.
Biden wants his troops out by September 11th, and that could strengthen the Taliban even more. So who exactly are the Taliban? How is it that they have so much power? And why are people worried they'll take
I'm sorry.
over Afghanistan again? To understand the Taliban, you need to know what happened in Afghanistan in the 1980s. Afghan guerrillas called the Mujahideen fought a Soviet occupation for 9 years. They even got money and weapons from the CIA. In 1989, the Soviets pulled out, and the next few years were pretty chaotic. By 1992, there was a full-blown civil war with tribal leaders fighting for power. 2 years later, a militia called the Taliban started getting attention. Many of its members had studied in conservative religious schools in Afghanistan and across the border in Pakistan, and some of them had also fought as Mujahideen. And they had their own plans for the country.
The people were so frustrated with this lawlessness, and the Taliban came marching along from Kandahar to city to city to city, saying, we're going to make the cities safe for you again.
By 1996, the Taliban had seized the capital. They declared Afghanistan an Islamic emirate and started imposing their own strict interpretation of Islamic law.
They were like, you can't watch movies, you can't listen to music, women can't go to school, and other than doctors, they can't go to work. You have to wear a certain type of clothes, you have to have a certain kind of beard, it just became more and more restrictive.
Then 9/11 happened. The US was after al-Qaeda's leader Osama bin Laden, who was hiding out in Afghanistan with the Taliban's help. The Taliban said they wanted proof he was behind the attack, and when they refused to hand him over immediately, the Americans invaded.
The Taliban will pay a price.
Within a couple of months, the Taliban were forced out of power, and Afghanistan got a new interim government. 3 years later, it got a new constitution, and Hamid Karzai was elected president. While that was going on, the Taliban had regrouped. They wanted foreigners out, and they wanted back in. What followed were years of devastating conflict, and it's still going on. More than 40,000 Afghan civilians killed, at least 64,000 Afghan military and police, and more than 3,500 international soldiers dead. The US alone has spent almost $1 trillion on the war and reconstruction projects. And after all that, Afghanistan is still deeply unstable, and the Taliban are still a force to reckon with.
They're an insurgency fighting international occupation as they see it. They're fighting an illegitimate government in Kabul as they see it. And they're a voice of resistance to, as they see it, return Afghanistan to a more pure Islamic society.
Today, the Taliban have as many as 85,000 full-time fighters and training camps across the country, and the area they control has been growing. Right now, the Taliban control 1/5 of Afghan districts. On top of that, half of all districts are considered contested, which means the Taliban have a strong presence in many of those places too. And they control parts of some major highways.
Whoever controls the roads in Afghanistan, pretty much controls the country. They've managed to basically give people the sense that, wherever you go, you'll have to deal with the Taliban.
They're also well organized. The Taliban's leader is Haibatullah Akhundzada. He heads a council that oversees about a dozen commissions in charge of things like finance, health, and education. Below them are local officials in charge of everyday services. So in a way, the Taliban have set up a parallel state. They even run their own courts, which can be pretty popular among Afghans.
Justice has been a huge gap in Afghanistan, and where the state courts have failed, these Sharia courts are able to come in. Communities may even be reticent to support the Taliban, but they offer justice.
All that control has also made them rich. According to Taliban members and a UN committee, they make close to $1.5 billion a year.
She goes good.
They've always made a lot of money
from
from growing opium
going to
poppies
the
and the
island.
drug trade. But they found even more ways to generate income. Last year, they made millions from mining and trading minerals and even producing methamphetamine. They also have their own tax collection system and receive funding from abroad, although suspected sources like Pakistan and Iran deny it. Over the years, the international community has tried to get the Taliban and the Afghan government talking, or at least to talk about talking. There was even a meeting in the Maldives at one point. And during a brief Eid ceasefire in 2018, Taliban and Afghan soldiers were seen mingling in Kabul, even praying together. But overall, peace negotiations haven't achieved much.
The Ghani government has been incredibly antagonistic and sees the Taliban as a real existential threat to everything that they represent.
The Taliban have been quite adamant on their demand that they want the re-establishment of their regime that was toppled by the US intervention.
The question now is, what will happen when the roughly 10,000 US and NATO soldiers leave? Will the Afghan government be able to survive? And what will the Taliban do? Well, the prospects for peace and stability aren't looking great. Even while peace talks have been going on, almost 1,800 Afghan civilians have been killed or injured in the first 3 months of this year. That's almost 30% more than last year.
Now let's quickly talk a little bit about the Afghanistan Papers.
President Biden, not long after he took office, made a decision that he's going to complete the withdrawal of U.S. military troops from Afghanistan, who have been there for almost 20 years.
I will not send another generation of Americans to war in Afghanistan.
This was something that his three predecessors had all tried to do.
And by the end of next year, our war in Afghanistan will be over.
And of course, thousands of troops remained in Afghanistan and continued to fight and continued to die.
A bombshell series of investigative reports in the Washington Post
of a trove of government documents.
Officials deliberately misled the public about what exactly was going on.
My name's Craig Whitlock, and I'm an investigative reporter for the Washington Post and an author of the book, The Afghanistan Papers, A Secret History of the War. The Afghanistan Papers are a collection of documents. They're interviews, most of them, with more than 400 people who played a direct role in the war. And these were interviews done by a government agency called the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan, in which they were confidentially asking people what went wrong during the war. For our book, The Afghanistan Papers, one thing we've obtained were hundreds of additional oral history interviews, government reports, and diplomatic cables. What was being told to the public was completely at odds with reality on the ground.
We have made remarkable progress.
We're not losing a war out here by any means.
We are prevailing.
They knew the war had been unwinnable. There were literally commanding generals saying we had no strategy, not just a bad strategy, we had no strategy at all. Our initial goal in invading Afghanistan back in 2001 was very clear at the time.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes
to try and eliminate al-Qaeda and prevent a repeat of the 9/11 attacks. Al-Qaeda was pretty much gone within the first 6 months of the war. It fled Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden went to Pakistan, and then it became blurrier. Who were we fighting? Who was the enemy? Was it just Al-Qaeda? Was it the Taliban? And that's where the mission really started to go awry, was there was no real consensus on what the United States was trying to achieve.
Routing out the Taliban was important, but building a school is equally important.
From democracy to women's rights to infrastructure to education.
I think the United States got ahead of itself. It tried to accomplish too much too quickly. The dollar cost was at least $1 trillion, but Afghanistan was so poor and destitute, it couldn't possibly absorb that much money in that short a period of time. So much of the money was wasted. It went into people's pockets. It corrupted many Afghan officials. Afghan people became less and less confident in their government. Obama tried to go in with a lot more troops in hopes of persuading the Taliban to cut a peace deal with the Afghan government. The whole strategy was to train the Afghan security forces so they could defend their own country, so they could defeat the Taliban on their own. The United States was really trying to build a whole new military in its own image. We're paying for up to 350,000 Afghan soldiers and police officers. The Taliban was frankly much more motivated, much better organized, and as US military officials make clear in the Afghan papers, the Afghan security forces really didn't have any motivation to fight. More than 90% of the recruits in the Afghan army were illiterate. It was such an enormous task, it was kind of doomed to failure from the beginning.
I'll check it out. No, I haven't.
The United States
that
conducted
iconic
an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda.
Hey, Idan Simpson, good to see you.
killed,
Let me give you some.
It's harder to say what we've accomplished in Afghanistan.
Everyone, go check out Idan Simpson's page. He's, as they say, based. I have not, and I'm not going to pretend here to have read the Afghanistan Papers in full. I've read a handful of summaries. I've read a handful of the selected ones that were published in that original Washington Post article. I believe someone you want to check out, of course, when it comes to these matters would be Dylan Burns. Dylan Burns has apparently read the papers in their entirety and would be able to give you a much more in-depth look into what was revealed and what the Americans were basically trying to hide from the public.
Despite what the generals and diplomats were telling the American public all along.
Our troops will fight to win.
President Trump, he was going to try and persuade...
Doesn't Dylan Burns oppose withdrawal from Afghanistan? So he, I think, like most people, oppose the kind of withdrawal that just took place, which was basically that they thought that there was a lot of high-tier Afghani generals who had already been appropriately paid for by the American government that were going to be able to hold and situate their militaries in such a way that the Taliban would not run through them as quickly as they did. And now it's coming out that apparently a lot of them were not even paid in full by the American government. The American military units there left very abruptly with a whole bunch of course, equipment. It's very similar to what happens when you create an insurgency, devastate the region, and then suddenly pull out rapidly without any kind of, let's say, infrastructure building or any kind of support system. There's going to be a vacuum of power that is created. And in that vacuum of power, suddenly it's going to be filled by, ooh, what's this? ISIS, ISIL, all these new baddies. And all of a sudden the cycle continues into infinite horrors. Didn't Bruins oppose withdrawal? But like ultimately, does he oppose U.S. interventionism in Afghanistan? Yes, of course. I think most people, even if you are, even conservatives I've spoken to at times, don't want these forever wars. They don't want tax dollars endlessly going into this huge mechanism that is the military-industrial complex. It's just most people, it just seems too far away a concept to even try and process, right? Like, what exactly is the military-industrial complex? How does it tie into government and my tax dollars? Is it contracts that come from the government? Are those contracts then taken on by private individuals or corporate entities, and they build the weapons, but then do they sell them to other countries? And then do they keep the money, or does America get the money? Or do we get the money back in some kind of a neat kind of like tax rebate stamp? Here's your bomb bucks or something of that.
We are killing terrorists.
And the way he was going to try
no,
and
I
get
haven't,
the
Cassian
Taliban
Eves.
to the bargaining table was, for lack of a better description, he was going to try and bomb the hell out of them. The number of airstrikes became higher under Trump than it even did under Obama when we had this surge of 100,000 troops. And in some respects, that worked. The Taliban did come to the negotiating table.
It's time for American troops to come home.
I think the tone coming out of President Biden is different from what we've heard in the past. Before, we always heard that we were going to win.
If this isn't a mission accomplished moment, what is it in your view?
No, there's no mission accomplished.
How would you describe it?
The mission was accomplished in that we got Osama bin Laden, and terrorism is not emanating from that part of the world.
The human causes.
I mean, you got Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, not in Afghanistan, and terrorism is emanating from that part of the world. Terrorism is being funded from a lot of different countries, though. I mean, Saudi Arabia, for example, was a large funding agent of terror organizations. It's tricky. Geopolitics is a complicated thing.
It's so staggering. More than 2,300 U.S. troops were killed in Afghanistan. Tens of thousands more were wounded and came back.
Hi from Winnipeg. Hello.
Doesn't even include the much bigger costs borne by the Afghan people. Well over 100,000 Afghans have also died in the war. This is a country that's been at war or in conflict for more than 40 years. And the United States spent all this money and spent more lives trying to fix it, but it really didn't accomplish a whole lot on that front.
It's really sad. And I know people have been trying to compare it to other U.S. interventions, for example, the war in Vietnam. I don't think that anyone should apply like a one-to-one in terms of just the utter chaos that is ravaged upon a country when something like this happens. Maybe what they're trying to do is to look at what the reflection of the world was post that event, because it took a very long time for the world to understand the gravity of what had happened in Vietnam. Like, Vietnam in and of itself was starting to come to public light, but the idea of like Laos, Cambodia, the bombing campaigns, the hundreds of thousands of dead civilians, like that, it took a while before all of that had entered the public consciousness. Okay, let's take a quick look at the conservative response to this, which I'm sure will be rational.
This would have never happened under President Donald J. Trump.
Yeah, is that what it's going to be? Just over and over and over.
Republican lawmakers and conservative media are doing some hilarious backpedaling as President Biden follows through on Trump's decision to withdraw the U.S. from Afghanistan. Now, I have several examples here. It is just the this bathing in hypocrisy that we expect from Republicans that, of course, once again, is on full display here.
Not how the last president left the situation.
No.
But it has taken us 20 years to get to this point of whatever the decisions were that delivered us, no end game. Those Gold Star families need what Lieutenant Colonel Davis just told me. They need accountability.
Yeah.
They need that for their own closure. But without all of that, it would have been nice just to get our people back quickly.
Yes.
Instead, this is protracted.
Yeah.
Like those flights are suspended.
Yep.
And we don't know who's coming onto that tarmac now.
Yes, let me be categorical in saying this. This would have never happened under President Donald J. Trump.
Former Trump press secretary she knows this was Trump's plan, but no, would not have happened under Donald Trump, even though
of course
he signed the deal to leave, even though he wanted to get out earlier than Joe Biden, not have happened under Donald Trump. It is so obviously dishonest, just blatant out there, and they don't care. They'll make the...
Now, everybody, don't get me wrong. Like everyone else, I'm not going to play the full clip because you've probably seen it a handful of times already about the planes being evacuated and people literally like attaching themselves, holding on to each other as the planes take off and then falling from the sky because they want to survive and escape the situation. It is absolutely heart-wrenching to see. It's times like this when genuinely, I think rather than doing all the finger pointing that I'm seeing people in the media and people online doing, being like, well, this is directly Biden's fault. This was before Biden. This is Trump's fault. He signed the papers. You know what? Even before Trump came along, there was fucking Obama. Hey, is anyone going to mention Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, the architects of this entire mess? Come on. They're the ones we should be pointing the fingers at. Who is to blame? Who is to blame? Who is to fucking blame? If we're going to be doing this big old thing that we always do, you know, the saber rattling, the swinging dick competition, we should be doing it right now for refugees. Okay, so which country is going to take in the most refugees by ratio of their population, by ratio of their resources, by ratio of what they can handle right now? That should be the new competition. That's how we should frame this. Because yes, it is absolutely heart-wrenching for anyone to see what is happening. People so desperate to leave these conditions. And yes, the Taliban will be horrifying and atrocious for the conditions of women who are living there. There is no question about that either. So that should be the next big competition. And in the same way I say that about why, instead of instigating and starting these brand new wars all around the world, why don't we unify against the problems that we already have? And this would be a very big one. So if you truly want to show that you are the mightiest in the land, the Sigma male, if you've got that Sigma mindset, if you're ready to grind, okay, then get your country to accept as many refugees as possible. Help them out in a time like this. I know Canada's already thrown down the 20,000 number. Could be more. Could be higher. Gotta be honest, you know, not very Sigma, not grinding there, Canada. Okay, but this is going to be matched by America. Are we going to lose to Europe? Who knows? This could be the new form of sports because we don't have sports as much anymore because, you know, the world's changed so quickly. Yeah, the right is already screaming that America is supposed to become Germany and that it's such a shit show. Yeah, this is not going to play well into the whole Tucker Carlson style of stuff, the great replacement stuff that I'm seeing all over as well. I was like, yeah, but that's fantastic. Now we've got mainstream great replacement theory, you know, going on. Of course, Tucker Carlson is pushing for that angle. The U.S. already has proven the planning process is not exactly a strong suit. What makes you think whatever planning the U.S. did would be conducive to people getting out and alive? Well, this may be a time for me to introduce the military-industrial complex and the unfortunate role that it has to play in all this. Hold on a sec. And talk about why I believe, personally, and my prescription has been for a while, that you shouldn't allow private corporations to be the benefactors of war. There shouldn't be a profit motive to a private corporation with a board, with CEOs, whose fiduciary responsibility once a year is to increase value for their shareholders. They should not be allowed to be involved in war, in profiteering off war. I would think for self-evident reasons. I don't even think this should be a really lefty thing. I don't even think this should be a, oh, Lance, call me Lance, going off again. But that kind of makes sense to me, that there shouldn't be a profit motive behind death and destruction. That can only lead to negative outcomes in the long term and in the short, and almost always. I've shown this one before, but it's really good, and it's probably the quickest way for me to summarize this whole issue. If you haven't checked out Our Changing Climate, by the way, really good channel. I would highly recommend them.
It's time to talk about the elephant in the room, the single most polluting industry in the world, the military. Specifically the US military, because the US war machine currently has a yearly budget of over $700 billion, which dwarfs the military spending of the next 8 countries combined in 2018. The US military is a behemoth, and the environmental consequences of its massive size and global presence are equally immense. Indeed, if the American military was a country, it would rank 47th, right in between Peru and Portugal for the highest global greenhouse gas emissions, and that's only based on military fuel use. Despite this, we're rarely exposed to the idea of the US military-industrial complex as a possible contributor to climate change. Instead, individual actions like taking shorter showers or composting food waste seem to be the primary push of the environmental movement. So the big question is...
Now, before I get a whole bunch of people in here telling me, Lance, are you doing nothing again? Are you going to go off about 100 companies and the 70% of emissions coming from those 100 companies, when at the end of the day, those 100 companies are producing emissions and extracting energy that is consumed by people? The truth of the problem lies a little bit in the middle, all right? There's bad actors on both sides, but we cannot ignore something like the military-industrial complex, the amount of CO2 that it produces. It's the largest single entity for CO2 production, as well as the fact that a lot of these industries and a lot of the extraction of these resources in order to be utilized on a global scale happen to be reinforced and accelerated because of capitalism driving them forward.
What are the consequences of this massive US military machine? And ultimately, what are the connections between militarism and climate change? The environmental cost of the US military is so large because the country has continuous...
Oh, absolutely. See, and I've been guilty of this. That's the problem with lefties who are just like, well, I'm going to absolve myself of personal responsibility, especially up here in the West, where we got it real nice, you know? Check this out. I can ride my bicycle when I want to get around, and I got plants, you know. I can have indoor plants, and can go outside and buy fruit and things, but I buy local. This shirt, I believe, I'm not going to look on the tag, but it was probably made by a local artisan, and I only support green, of course, and that's why I'm just a better person than most, you know. I hope to afford an electric car at some point, and that will make me, I guess, the ultimate lefty, and then climate change is solved. Obviously, I don't have to really adjust too much of my life. I mean, there's nothing I can do against the big government and everyone else, but I've done my part. Whereas the truth is that we here in the West enjoy quite a different lifestyle on a regular basis than a lot of the world does. Like a lot of the world, like we're using energy a lot faster than a lot of the rest of the world, especially parts of the world that are getting it real bad. They're gonna be facing some of the worst parts of climate change, not in the near future, but kind of now. So there will be adjustments, but the adjustments do not have to be scary. I know a lot of people think you might have to eat bugs, or live in cubes, or perhaps become a Tamagotchi. Don't worry, or maybe all three. And maybe that's your thing, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. There are better ways of doing things, and we need to find out what they are, and then we can make prescriptions and then apply them to a broad scale of humanity, would be my advice in this case.
Piled money into the Department of Defense ever since the 1980s Reagan-era push for military spending transformed the world's biggest lender into the biggest debtor. A recently approved defense budget of $738 billion for the 2020 fiscal year only cements this lust for U.S. military growth around the globe. And to be clear, the U.S. military is a global entity. It has established roughly 800 military bases in 80 countries around the world, according to David Fine, author of Base Nation. To put that in perspective, all other countries combined have established roughly 70 foreign bases. So the U.S. military is gargantuan. And to fuel that machine, they need, well, fuel. From 2001 to 2017, the U.S. military emitted an estimated 1.2 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent, according to the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. That's That's the same as putting an additional 257 million cars, or roughly the amount of passenger cars currently in operation, on the road in the US for a whole year. From Humvees running at 4 miles per gallon or gas-guzzling F-22 fighter jets, the machines of war that the Department of Defense purchases and maintains require a lot of fuel, in the realm of 85 million barrels of fuel in 2017. But the US military pollution does not stop and end at emissions. The military has blazed a sharp trail of environmental and chemical pollution across the world, racking up 39,000 contaminated sites, according to a Newsweek interview with the former head of environmental programs at the Pentagon. 143 of the Superfund sites in the United States are military bases, and 900 of the 1,344 total sites are areas that previously supported military needs, according to the same Newsweek interview. At Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, for example, the drinking water servicing 170,000 people is so polluted with cancer-causing chemical solvents like trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene that it's been called
the worst example of water contamination this country has ever seen.
In short, the US military has a long track record of pollution and emissions that often is tacitly accepted by otherwise environmentally minded people in the name of national defense and military preparedness. But let's be clear here. The majority of the wars the US has fought and the massive military structure it's built has rarely been in the name of peace or safety. More often than not, it's centered around profit and control. The United States has a long history of using military power to assert dominance over potentially strategic or profitable entities. Like in Panama in 1989, when George H.W. Bush deployed 25,000 troops to oust the military leader and previous CIA asset, General Noriega, who began acting against U.S. interests. In Noriega's stead, Bush propped up Guillermo Endara, who was much more loyal to the U.S. global agenda, or in 1973, when the United States supported a coup to overthrow democratically elected Chilean socialist leader Salvador Allende, replacing him with ruthless dictator Augusto Pinochet, who in the months following his rise to power imprisoned, tortured, and killed thousands of supposed leftist sympathizers in order to establish an economy that a New York Times reporter called quote-unquote a banker's delight, or the US-backed indiscriminate slaughter of East Timorese by Indonesian forces, or the multi-decade war razing Iraq to the ground to protect the flow of fuel from Middle Eastern oil fields into American cars. The same oil fields which Vice President Dick Cheney's former company, Halliburton, secured a non-competitive contract for up to $7 billion to rebuild. The list drags on. The point here is this. In many cases, the US military has guzzled millions of barrels of fuel and killed thousands to establish and maintain control of profitable international interests. One of the most decorated Marines in US history, Major General Smedley Butler, rams this reality home in his book, War is a Racket.
I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service, and during that period, I spent most of my time as a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism.
Ironically, the Department of Defense has released reports characterizing climate change as a security risk. But of course, their solution is not to scale back their own emission-intensive operations, but instead, it's doing more of the same. So when we're trying to understand the connections between environmentalism and demilitarization, we have to recognize a simple reality. War is always an environmental hazard. There's no such thing as a responsible military or green war. It is, in fact, irresponsible to suggest that it's possible to green the military, as Elizabeth Warren has proposed. Though it is admirable to find solutions within a corrupt and irredeemable system, the 2018 IPCC report has made clear that we have no time for slow change, and small reforms prevent us from focusing and investing in the larger, more radical changes that need to happen. Demilitarization is a lofty goal. In the United States, it is not unreasonable to feel despair about the possibility of ever demilitarizing a country with such a fetish for violence and control. But dire circumstances require radical solutions. Keep in mind that even if the current military budget is slashed in half, the US would still spend more than double the amount China does. So the military-industrial complex is beyond bloated. And as we look towards a future marked by climate change, to me it's clear where taxpayer money needs to go. If the United States can pour $4.79 trillion into the wars in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, they certainly can extract themselves from a fossil fuel-centric economy. Money doesn't need to be piled into the over-polluting and violent machine that is the US military. It instead needs to be invested in strong, publicly favored initiatives like the Green New Deal, which would supply dignified low-carbon jobs to thousands, reinvest in the US's crumbling infrastructure, and establish an economy based on care.
That would be nice. An economy based on care.
We're also working closely with the U.S. and looking at how we can remove more people in the coming days and weeks. And we're working with our allies on what Canada, as part of the international community, can do to stabilize the situation, protect civilians, and put an end to the violence. This includes taking leadership by bringing Afghans to safety in Canada, with hundreds of people having already arrived. In the coming days, a number of the Afghan families that arrived weeks ago will be ending their COVID-19 quarantine and able to start their new lives across the country.
I'll give them this, beyond the the ridiculous smile and the blackface and all that shit. They have allowed 20,000 refugees so far, but Canada could handle a lot more than 20,000. So that number can be increased dramatically. But like I said, one competition that all these countries should be having with each other, instead of this whole tis your fault, who can take in the most refugees per capita. That could be a new game instead of war, you know?
One of our priorities in Afghanistan has always been the safety of women and girls. This is something I've discussed a number of times with Minister Maryam Mosef. Maryam is herself an extraordinary...
This is from the Conservative Party of Canada. Canada's recovery plan will secure the future for you, your children, and their children. Sounds very 14 wordsy. Secure jobs, secure accountability, secure mental health, secure the country, secure our economy. Fuck it. 'Twas low-hanging fruit. They'll nothing to do with me. That tweet will be deleted within, I don't know, a couple hours once the PR spin, and one news organization has to pick up on the fact that is a little kind of secure a future for our children. What the hell?
From Afghanistan, who understands just how precarious the situation is. She continues to work tirelessly across government and with partners to improve the situation.
So, Canada has no plans to recognize the Taliban as the government of Afghanistan, even if the Taliban formally signs an agreement with the current government of Afghanistan. So that will lead to an unusual situation. I'm not entirely sure what exactly Canada's diplomatic relationships are going to be. They simply won't recognize them as a functional government or functioning government. We will see. Usually Trudeau follows in line with whatever Joe Biden wants him to do at any given time. We haven't really seen that clash between America and Canada since the Jean Chrétien era. Back when Bush was we should go into Afghanistan, and Jean Chrétien was okay, fuck, have fun, enjoy. I will put pepper on my steak, you know. He was also a piece of shit, by the way. I'm not trying to praise Jean Chrétien by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, I wanted to see what this was all about, because Hassan was the segment is hilarious because it ends with Tucker agreeing with the Taliban.
But first, since Kabul has just fallen, it might be worth asking the most obvious question of all. Why did the Taliban win? How did the 6th century triumph over the 21st century? There are indications that the single most notorious and reviled government in the world, primitive people famous for their brutality, rigidity, and humorlessness, are more popular in parts of Afghanistan than they were when we expelled the mullahs from Kandahar 20 years ago.
Okay, wait, hold on. Hello, world. The TERFs are aligning themselves with the Taliban and the incels. Wait, the TERFs as a whole? Are the TERFs a monolith? Well, okay, yes, the TERFs are a monolith, fine. But do they have a committee? Is there you know what, our next goal, we align ourselves with the Taliban here?
They don't seem to be less popular. So how did that happen? What's the answer? We ought to pause to think about that. Let's not just blow past it like it was an act of God. It's not. What is the answer?
Okay.
Well, countries are very complicated, all of them, so there are likely many answers. But one of those answers may be that the population of Afghanistan has firmly rejected what our leaders were selling it over 20 years. It turns out that the people of Afghanistan don't actually want gender studies symposia. They didn't actually buy the idea that men can become pregnant. They thought that was ridiculous.
Okay, wait, did you say pregnant? Pregnant?
Can become pregnant. They
That's not fair. I mispronounce everything. I mispronounce every third word, okay? I should not be throwing stones. But I don't know. Maybe it's that meme, right? You know the meme. Are you pregante? Are you pregnant?
Thought that was ridiculous. They don't hate their own masculinity. They don't think it's toxic. They like the patriarchy. Some of
Holy
their
shit.
women like it too.
So he's going full, the American military went too woke. That's it. That's why they lost. The American military went woke. But the Taliban, those are men's men, you know? They don't allow women in the military. They don't even allow them to have rights, really. At the end of the day, they're humorless. He said that. That was his own words. He was like, they're humorless. So no time for jokes. Just time for exercise, getting swole, and destroying your enemies. That's it. And God. Lots of God. Lots of religion, lots of God. I guess that is Tucker Carlson's ideal fighting force. He's, like most Republicans now, aligning himself with the Taliban. Anything to own the libs. Owning the libs is tough these days, you know? Back in the day, you might just have to throw a Gillette razor in the toilet. Maybe cut up one of your Nike shoes. Now owning the libs is like straight up, yeah, no, I'll sign up for the Taliban. Yeah. No, I gotta do it. Gotta own those libs. Let's get those tears.
So now they're getting it all back. So maybe it's possible that we failed in Afghanistan because the entire neoliberal program is grotesque. It's a joke. It's contrary to human nature. It answers none of our deepest human desires. It is merely a performance staged for the performer. It's not even supposed to improve your life. It's ridiculous. And ideas that ridiculous can only be imposed by force, only with armed men at gunpoint. The moment these ideas are not mandatory, the second the troops withdraw, in fact, people tend to revert to the lives that they prefer to live. That may be the real lesson of Afghanistan. Let's hope our leaders notice it.
I mean, it was only a matter of time. I think, Winston, you just sent me another proof that the conservatives are aligning themselves with the Taliban. What's this? The Taliban spokesman got a question about freedom of speech, and he said the question should be asked to US companies like Facebook who claim to promote it while censoring. Taliban more pro-First Amendment than the US government. Just another embarrassment. What is going on? What is Cons, are you okay? We've reached next level when the Taliban is hitting at the totalitarianism of the US, and yes, they're telling the truth here. They're saying that even though the Taliban are evil, they're not stupid because they recognize the existence of sex as a concept. Basically, either Taliban are smarter than the woke left, or the Taliban understand what women are. We gotta find a way to get the right angry about dihydrogen monoxide. I do not know what that is. I'll pause you to know what it is. It's a parody involving calling water by an unfamiliar chemical name, more often dihydrogen monoxide, and listing some of the water's properties as particularly alarming manner, such as accelerating corrosion, causing suffocation, rust, and drowning. The parody often calls dihydrogen monoxide to be banned, regulated. Ooh. You see, I could have got right there. You should have just gone on with it, you know? You should have just gone on. Yeah, you should have just been, you could have roped me right into it. I would have fallen for it. Been like, Lance, I mean, they don't even know the first thing. Have they heard about dihydrogen monoxide? It's bad. It's bad. Accountancula. What's this? Another freedom speech warrior? When you free speech record. Oh no, wait! I promised I would retire my Scottish accent. My terrible Scottish accent. I'm sorry. I always break my promises. Well, one more conservative to retweet Liam McCollum, and we have ourselves the quad. Okay. Well, we're still on the topic of the Taliban. Let's see what lies beyond the beanie. I'm curious what he has to say about the whole thing.
The political manipulation of information. Let's call it that. This morning, when I was reading about the news and just going over general fact checking and stuff, I came across. I was fairly certain I was reading somewhere on Wikipedia that the Taliban was estimated in 2017 to have 200,000 soldiers, which is a massive number. And that means there was a massive increase in the size of the Taliban during the Obama-Biden administration, specifically, because their numbers were substantially lower around 2008 or so. So they went up from 18,000 to 50,000 to 200,000 by 2017. Well, that would imply that Donald Trump, before he came in office, inherited this conflict in Afghanistan that was untenable. 200,000.
Okay, wait. How is Nicholas? Is this him on some other platform, I assume? The booger picker? The Taliban is going to ban abortion, vaccines, and gay marriage. Maybe we were fighting on the wrong side for 20 years. Actually doing the meme I did this morning. Like, I did that as a meme. The Taliban are the only people building back better. tweeted out, Taliban have announced their political agenda for Afghanistan includes abortion is banned, gay marriage outlawed, rejection of science, no vaccines, no separation of church and state, religion taught in schools, and then the Ted Cruz coming face, or maybe it's like I got felt up by an angel face, because like that's the conservative agenda right there. And people have made that joke before. I mean, that's not new. That goes all the way back to like the Four Horsemen, edgy atheist days, where like Christopher Hitchens loved to be like, well, you know, if you look at conservatives and you look at their agendas, ultimately, a lot of what they reflect upon is that of an Islamic caliphate. It's virtually indistinguishable at times if you want to read between the lines, so, as I am one to do, read the lines themselves. Yeah, that's the fourth one. That one's perfect.
Taliban, that's a crazy number. Well, we were doing research for this for this show, and I was like, I want to pull that up and talk about that. That's really interesting. See, like, who's really at fault here? I mean, Biden's president now, but he was vice president, you know, for 8 years when this problem was happening. So I Google searched. Here's what you find when you Google search Taliban size in 2017. It says in 2017, the Taliban was estimated to have 200,000 troops, and that's the Wikipedia entry for the Taliban. However, if you actually go, that entry has been removed, and they've changed. I'll just go right in. They've changed the year. Check this out, to 2021. Now look at that. That's really interesting because, you know, why those years and why remove that source and then say 200,000 in 2021? Well, in my opinion, it changes responsibility. If you're saying that in 2014 there were 60,000.
He knows how Wikipedia works. What?
Taliban. You are basically implying that under Donald Trump, the Taliban
good.
massively grew in size. Yet when you Google search it, it said 2017. So which is it? Honestly, I don't know for sure. The sources have changed, and I'll tell you this. Everybody is going to try and use that to point the blame at the other side. But I do think it's fair to say Obama...
Is this government intervention? 1984, censorship, unlike anything we've ever seen? No way to know.
Biden had 8 years of this. Trump came in, put in a deal to shut it down. I'm glad it's finally over. I can say that. I don't know if you guys, what your thoughts are on the numbers.
Yeah, I don't know who keeps count on the Taliban count on Taliban numbers. If it's intelligence community, they were saying a couple of days ago that Kabul can hold the Taliban push for 90 days, and it held like for 90 minutes or 90 hours.
Yeah.
So
isn't it crazy to think that they have 200,000 though? That's
I'm wondering if they
number.
change the way that they measure who's in the Taliban or not, like they do the census.
Like how Obama did when we started killing civilians.
Right, like it could be any non-American.
Yeah, like I saw a tweet. I think I forgot who it was. He said that any refugee red tape from Afghanistan needs to be removed, and we need to welcome in refugees. So I wrote, what's the process for the U.S. to protect against former Taliban members who will then claim they're refugees? It's not like the U.S. has a database of exactly everyone who was part of the Taliban. Right. So I think a lot of these numbers, whether they're more or less, I think it's just guesses, estimates, which if it's from the intelligence community, it's potentially flawed, as we have seen many things that they estimate about Afghanistan being totally flawed.
So the source for the Wikipedia that says 200,000 is in January. Now here's the funny thing. Al Jazeera, the Taliban explained, they say on the 25th of July, 2021, and updated on August 15th, they mention, let's scroll right down, the group is believed to have 85,000 full-time fighters across the country and exert control over more than half the country's roughly 400 districts. Why isn't this article, which is newer, used as the source on Wikipedia? Why was the data changed?
It's good propaganda, baby. That's a lot of Taliban. Makes us look like the good guys.
Isn't it crazy to think that we're in information? I'm not going to say one is right. I'm sure someone will make their argument. They'll be like, oh, well, that was an official report, from, a military contractor or from the government. This is Al Jazeera. And then someone could argue, well, Al Jazeera's got resources in the region. They certainly have better access to the information. They're going to know better. Everyone.
I mean, you could make the propaganda right now if you wanted. You could go try and edit some of that Wikipedia article. You could look at the source of the Wikipedia article. You could see when the change was made, who made it, and why they made it. That's usually in the history of changes, especially for locked articles. That too. You could do a lot of things. Or posture that the whole thing is part of some massive conspiracy. That one is more interesting. I'll give you that.
One's going to argue, but I'll tell you this: we are constantly in the middle of propagandistic warfare. It's a horrible reality of
I've been asked that question before. And chat, if you're not familiar, does he have one beanie or does he have a row of beanies like Superman? And for his sake, I hope he has a row of beanies. I hope there's just like 20 or 30 beanies, and that's also for his guest's sake. Because if it's just the same beanie, day in, day out, Jesus Christ. Like, holy fuck. That's It's on a heavy, profuse, sweaty part of the body. Be quite intense. Yeah. Well, that and the headlights.
World we live in. You know, we used to have TV commercials. Now it's constantly, they're changing history. You know, the news breaks. It looks bad for Obama. So they had 4 years. Hey, the estimate 200,000. They removed the 2017 number. Now it seems like Trump's
But again, who is looking at Afghanistan as a project through the perspective of whether it's a bomb or not? I think the average person who follows the news zooms out for a moment and says, you know what, it's 20 years. There've been many presidents, and even Biden. You know, Biden didn't come in as someone saving the day. He was a senator for I don't know how many years that Afghanistan was going on, and then he was vice president. So he wasn't an onlooker. He was there for most of the time. So I think the typical person who follows the news a little bit thinks of Afghanistan as a total mess all around. This party, that party, it doesn't matter. It's like, it's a mess. And I think people are left scratching their head. Okay, we had there only 2,500 soldiers there for a while now, and the peace held. So what happened now that everything went to hell in a handbasket? I think just from a practical perspective, not necessarily political, people would want to wonder that rather than exactly when it went up or down.
Might be it was costing us $40 billion a year recently, up to now, like a couple trillion since we went in, $2 trillion I think. So maybe it's just like bankrupt times because of COVID.
I gotta say, I really love the meme post where it's like the school children in Afghanistan, and all of these establishment Dems are like, these poor school children now can't go to school and the girls are running home, and then someone comments, none of them are wearing masks. Like, where's the priority for Afghanistan for these kids or whatever? Not that I think that's actually the main priority.
$10,000 invested in defense stocks when Afghanistan war began, now worth almost $100,000. Was the Afghanistan war a failure? Not for the top 5 defense contractors and their shareholders. Oh, so that's who won. That makes sense. And that's probably a safe place to put your bets or your money, if that's where you want to park your money. Because defense contractors typically, as I'm sure a lot of you are learning by watching the show or just in general by seeing the way life kind of evolves, you'll learn if you purchase $10,000 of stock, evenly divided amongst America's top 5 defense contractors on September 18, 2001, the day that President George W. Bush signed into authorization for the use of military force in response to 9/11 terrorist attacks, and faithfully reinvested all dividends, it would now be worth $97,295. Now, before you get too excited, and before we go to, I told every single one of you this is all about defense contracts. A lot of it has to do with defense contracts, but, and there's a big but here, how much did other stocks increase as well? Because there was definitely a fluctuation, shall we say, of just the overall stock market during that time. And if you would have invested $10,000 in a blue chip stock 20 years ago, yes, it would probably be worth a lot more money today. Not necessarily just these companies. But what is particularly disgusting by this is the fact that these companies happen to be manufacturers of the weapons of war, and are selling and profiting off the death and misery of human beings. So that is the part that, yes, there's no conspiracy there. It's just business. It's just capitalism, you know? This is by far a greater return than what was available in the overall stock market over the same period. Oh shit! Getting course corrected in the middle of the article. Thanks, Intercept. $10,000 invested in the S&P 500 index on September 18, 2000 would now be worth $61,613. So that is a much bigger jump. You'd get about $30,000 more if you were willing to invest in blood and carnage. Now, I know some of you are totally down with blood and carnage, and if you are, very profitable. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, The Corporation, but someone is interviewed in that film, and they're like, the first thing that went through the minds of every single investor when the towers hit was, ooh, I wonder what the price of gold is up to now. Which is a really fucked up way to think of the world, but in crisis, there's opportunity. We've often spoken about the Simpsons term, right? Crisitunity. That is, defense stocks outperformed the stock market overall by 58% during the Afghanistan war. Moreover, given the top 5 biggest defense contractors, Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics are of course part of the S&P 500, the remaining firms and lower returns than the overall S&P returns. These numbers suggest that it is incorrect to conclude that the Taliban's immediate takeover of Afghanistan upon the US's departure means that the Afghanistan war was a failure. On the contrary, from the perspective of some of the most powerful people in the US, it may have been an extraordinary success. Notably, the boards of directors of all 5 defense contractors, including retired top military officers. Several commentators addressed this dynamic in the 2005 documentary, Why We Fight, about a warning that President Dwight Eisenhower issued about the military-industrial complex. By the way, anyone who used to be on the board of Raytheon currently in Joe Biden's administration as well? Did he make any money from the Afghanistan war? Just wondering. I guarantee you, when the war becomes that profitable, you're going to see a lot more of it. A retired Air Force lieutenant colonel says, American people who have a son or daughter that's going to be deployed, they look at the cost benefit and they go, I don't think that's good. But when politicians who understand contracts, future contracts, when they look at war, they have different cost benefit analysis. These are specific results for the relevant contractors in September 2001. The S&P total returns 516.67%, annualized return 9.56%, $10,000 2001 stock purchase today would be $61,613. However, if you are in the basket of the top 5 contractor stocks, Boeing total return 974.97%. Baby, holy fuck, that's good. Annualized return 12.67%. This is good. This is the to the moon shit. All right. I don't know why we were always talking about Doge. Okay, why we're talking about AMC, fucking GameStop. Like, you want to go to the moon. I mean, you still need some patience. It's not going to be overnight. No, there's no insta fix, but there's some safe bets. And again, blood, carnage, some safe bets. Raytheon 331.49%. Wow. Annualized return, 7.62%. Lockheed Martin, 1,235% return, baby. Holy shit. If you were in Lockheed Martin, oh, you are sitting pretty now, baby. Can you imagine that? You know, you take out your lady or your gentleman or your non-binary individual for a nice cool glass of Chablis. You settle down. Have yourself a little Getty. And then she's like, how can you afford to take me out to such splendor, such finery? We're drinking the finest Chablis the money can buy. Oh, what's this? What's this? Jewels. Enchanted jewels for me. Well, thank you. I don't know why I deserve this. Where pray tell did all this money come from? Where did you get these blood diamonds? And you're like, it's funny you would make a joke about blood diamonds, because these are actually the profits of war. So yeah, this is all laced with blood. Not literally. Not literally. You can enjoy the Chablis. Enjoy that. Enjoy the Getty. All right? That'll taste exquisite. Exquisite. Yes, not literally. Not literally going to have, you know, the blood of poor children on there, Yemenis children and Afghani children and Iraqi children and all the future wars as well, but figuratively, it's drenched in blood. It's just a sea of blood. Yeah, blood and smoke. That's where it all came from, baby. Was that the biggest one? Yep, I think Lockheed Martin, 1,235.6%, 60% return. And then second place would be Northrop Grumman with 1,196.14%. Oof. It's good eats, everybody. Good eats. Oh, I don't want to learn about depressing things like the fall of Kabul and all the horrible things that are going on. I just want to enjoy how silly everything is. Why is Afghanistan possible to conquer? I've explained a little bit of it before. Why don't we do 1.5?
This video is made possible by CuriosityStream and Nebula. Watch $15 withdrawing, and the Taliban appears to be stronger than ever, with control of up to 85% of the country. In 1979, the Soviet Union also invaded Afghanistan, and after 9 years, they also withdrew, and the regime they fought so hard to prop up almost immediately collapsed. And before them, the British Empire invaded Afghanistan on 3 separate occasions and failed to conquer them in each instance. Today, Afghanistan has a smaller population than California in a territory that's only a little larger than France. So how is it that a country of this small size was capable of resisting 3 of the world's most powerful military juggernauts from history? There's a lot of answers to that question, but let's start with the easiest to understand and perhaps the most obvious: geography. In reality, Afghanistan is little more than a geographical expression. All of her borders...
So, Dave of the Serfs is watching the show, and he just finally saw that tweet by the Conservative Party, and he was like, holy shit, Jesus Christ! And I was like, yeah, I think we got an intern fired. I think we just got an intern fired.
Borders were arbitrarily drawn up by outside foreign powers more than a century ago. Its small population is composed of a loose association of 14 different ethno-linguistic groups and numerous more tribes, many of which, like the Uzbeks, Tajiks, and Pashtuns, straddle the country's borders. Artificial boundaries set up by Westerners hundreds of years ago that mean very little to them. The Pashtuns make up nearly half of Afghanistan's population today, but 2/3 of all Pashtuns live next door in neighboring Pakistan and are a minority group there. The border between Afghanistan and Pakistan runs directly through the Pashtun tribal area and divides the 60 million Pashtun people between both countries. This boundary was artificially decided by the British Empire back in 1893, and to date, not a single government based in Afghanistan has ever officially ratified it. Imagine if in Europe, Poland was divided between Germany and Russia, and a wall was built directly between both sides of where the Poles live. Obviously, the Poles would never recognize this border and routinely cross it to visit family and friends, and the Pashtuns largely treat the Afghan-Pakistan border the very same way. The border here is extremely mountainous and rural, so patrolling it from the Pakistani government's perspective has always been quite challenging. This has allowed Pashtun insurgents operating within Afghanistan the valuable ability to easily escape across the border into the friendly Pashtun areas of Pakistan, regroup and recover, recruit more men, and then travel back into Afghanistan freshly supplied and ready for more combat. Neither the Afghan border nor the Taliban recognize this border as legitimate, and there are at least 235 known crossing points across the border and through the mountains between both countries. Militants, drugs, money, and supplies can easily be smuggled into Afghanistan by way of Pakistan, and it's made all the easier by many of the Pashtuns of Pakistan being more sympathetic to the Afghan or Taliban cause. This has led many people to label the Afghan-Pakistan border as the most dangerous border in the entire world. And recently, as a result of all of this, by the end of June 2021, Pakistan has finally finished building a fence across the entire length of the border, specifically to stop all of this, and has restricted border crossings to only 16 legally designated locations. But this is all only the start of what makes Afghanistan an almost impossible place to conquer. I mean, just look at the map. Afghanistan is landlocked, so getting your troops and supplies there requires the cooperation of at least one of the 6 countries that borders it: Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, China, and of course, Pakistan. But even once you get across one of these countries and you arrive at Afghanistan's borders, you're going to be met with Afghanistan's monumentally challenging terrain. Despite being in the center of the world's most populous continent, Afghanistan has always been heavily isolated and largely rural and underpopulated because of this. The high peaks of the Hindu Kush mountain range with some of the tallest and biggest mountains found anywhere on the planet. 75% of Afghanistan's territory is considered to be mountainous, and nearly half of our territory has an elevation above 2,000 meters, which makes Afghanistan among the most mountainous countries of the world, and among the most isolated too as a result. These huge mountains act like natural walls in more ways than one. They help to keep invaders out, but they also separate communities within and make transporting supplies across challenging. These are all very difficult factors to overcome from the perspective of any outside invader. There are dozens of valleys that zigzag in between the mountains of Afghanistan where most of the population resides, and since they're surrounded by some of the biggest and most formidable mountains on Earth, it's always been difficult to travel between them, and consequently, they're each sort of their own little world inside of Afghanistan. Over thousands of years, they each ended up developing their own rather distinctive cultures, identities, beliefs, tribes, and rulers, and thus, there's very little sense of Afghan nationhood, and Afghan patriotism has never been a particularly strong motivating factor. Because of all these separate and rural communities that are difficult to travel between, the grip of any central government has always been weak and intermittent, while the valleys have largely governed themselves autonomously, especially in the countryside. Any semblance of Afghan national unity has always been a direct consequence of foreign powers invading and attempting to impose their rule over the whole, like with the British, Soviets, and recently Americans. Historically, and up to the present day to an extent, Afghanistan continues to operate in a way that's more similar to the Holy Roman Empire than the European Union. The ruler in the capital city Kabul may nominally wield de jure authority over the entire realm, like the Holy Roman Emperor, but is not able to wield de facto authority over all of the various princes, valleys, tribes, and clans, just like the Holy Roman Emperor. Any invader coming in to occupy Afghanistan will struggle with all of the same issues that a domestic ruler will. Afghanistan's geography is not very conducive to a centralized authority, and neither is Afghanistan's infrastructure. Enforcing your authority across the various Afghan valleys means that you must move your troops and supplies from one to another through the various mountain passes that are often narrow and incredibly easy positions to set up an ambush in as a defender. These passes basically act like natural choke points for the movement of people all across Afghanistan, and up until the 1960s, there were hardly even any roads to speak of that went through them. Control over just a few of these mountain passes can ensure control over an entire valley, and sabotaging one can block the flow of supplies and troops for days, weeks, or even longer depending upon the severity of the damage. When the Soviets invaded the country, the Mujahideen defenders would ambush Soviet convoys as they traveled through these passes, and then immediately flee back and vanish into the caves of the mountains when they were fired back upon. They would set up roadblocks at river crossings or in other passes, and in some instances were successful enough to block entire roads for months or even years. The town of Khost near the Pakistan border was permanently sealed off from the rest of the country for the entire war by the Mujahideen, sabotaging a series of strategic roads, and the government forces blocked inside could only be supplied by air. And when the Americans invaded, these passes were just as vital. Most significant for them was the Khyber Pass here, the easiest and most direct path through the Hindu Kush between the Indian subcontinent and Central Asia. This path has been used for thousands of years by conquerors, traders, and missionaries all alike, and is without a doubt one of the most strategic locations to hold on the entire planet. At one point, nearly 80% of all NATO and US supplies that were being brought into Afghanistan by road were all coming through the Khyber Pass via Pakistan, which is kind of ironic because most of the Taliban's equipment were also coming from across the border in Pakistan, just at different and more rural crossing points. The Taliban knew how critically important the Khyber Pass was to the American war effort, so it was a frequent target of sabotage efforts. In 2009, the Taliban blew up a bridge here that temporarily shut down the entire pass, and America was forced to broaden their supply lines into Afghanistan through the 3 Central Asian bordering countries as well. In the years before all of this war, the Afghan government had attempted to build a circular highway that would connect all of their major economic centers together. But over the decades of civil war and Soviet intervention, the highway was in very bad shape. By the time the United States invaded in 2001, there were only a mere 50 kilometers of paved roads to speak of in the entire country that's bigger than France. For comparison, France has 1.1 million kilometers of paved roads in a smaller and significantly less mountainous territory. The lack of good roads only made the disparate valleys and communities of the Afghan interior even more isolated from each other, and it made transporting troops and supplies a logistical nightmare for the Americans and the Soviets before them, none of which helped at all for the country's stability. As with all things in Afghanistan, the development of new roads is difficult and expensive because of the harsh mountainous terrain, the cold winter weather that often chews roads up, and sabotage from the Taliban and other insurgents. Building or repairing roads in the country necessitates hiring security and necessitates building them across harsh geography and climates, which means that it can get incredibly expensive, as much as $5 million per mile in some locations. And this is all in a country where the average person only makes a little over $500 a year, one of the poorest and least developed nations on the planet. The construction of a single mile of road within Afghanistan is about the combined annual wages of 9,800 Afghanis. So, obviously, the funding for all of these projects has to come from abroad. Ultimately, Afghanistan is easy to invade and take over, but it's almost impossible to effectively hold it for long. The landscape is huge, with a lot of rural and empty places for insurgents and rebels to hide. Getting troops in and establishing supply lines through massive mountains and narrow passes is challenging and easy for guerrilla combatants to harass and disrupt. The relationship with neighboring Pakistan is complex, and Pashtun insurgents can easily cross the border and regroup without much fear, and then return to fight in Afghanistan whenever ready. The flow of insurgent supplies, money, and manpower across the border is difficult to stop through the hundreds of high and remote mountain passes, and requires the cooperation of Pakistan, which she is sometimes willing to give and other times not. Centralized rule is almost impossible to enforce outside of Kabul by way of Afghanistan's geographic reality, and a nation building is inherently impossible because even the concept of an Afghan nation among Afghanistan's various ethnicities and tribes is tenuous at best, and certainly radically different from the Western idea of nation-states such as Germany or France. The colonial-era borders of Afghanistan dictated by the British over a century ago are probably the biggest core reason for Afghanistan's instability, but Afghanistan has been particularly unstable even by former British colonial meddling standards. For the past 43 years, Afghanistan has been embroiled in constant warfare, and it's an incredibly complex story to tell.
This is a very good video. On the first part. On the second part, that might be, I mean, obviously, whenever these questions come up, it's like, what do you want to do with these other countries? And I guess the Canadian standpoint is a little less like, we're going to take over this other country and we're going to spread democracy there. Ours is more like, we're going to wait for you Americans to do that, and then we come in and then do some contracts and then mine the country for all it's worth. So that's what we do. We kind of step in and do the scavenger thing after you've already done the imperialism thing. That's kind of that's the friendship between America and Canada that we got going. But if the question is asked, what should be done for the people themselves? And if you were to ask people on the ground, like, what is your ideal scenario? Not those who have been captured, obviously, or are under the control of the Taliban, but people who have their own options. If it were to have the whole country not be, like, I already sound like Carl Sagan again, if it would be to, like, divide the country up, similar to the way that there are separate, like, tribes, cultures, if that was what would achieve something better than what the British should have done, which is basically draw these artificial boundaries, that is also contributing towards all the chaos that we see in that area, it would be difficult. Do you want movies and Serfs watching the movies? Then come over to the new channels. It's the Serfs Cinema. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Can you do the thing, you know, that thumbs up and comment and all those things that help us out in the algorithm that controls every aspect of our lives? Also, if you happen to have a Facebook account, can you delete it? Like, just delete it. You should probably delete your Facebook account because it's not a great company. But hey, if you can't do that for whatever reason, I understand. And could you also go to facebook.com/thesurftimes then and give us a little like and a follow. We're just trying to push back against the fact that people like Ben Shapiro happen to dominate the platform entirely. And when everyone asks, why do older generations believe the things they believe? One of the problems is the majority of them on social media use Facebook. So to counter that, we're just going to be on there too now. Also, if you happen to have a union or a worker co-op or even a leftist project, podcast, website, Zoom, MySpace, it doesn't matter. We will advertise it for free on this channel. All you got to do is go to weareserfs.com and use the forms that we got there, weareserfs.com. Thanks, everybody.
To our gods, Tigro and Peyton El Jus, we pray to you, our sky daddies, to keep us safe from harm. To our monarchs, Tom Spiker and the Tim Caucus, we shall humbly clean your golden toilets in your spatial palaces. To our lords, Ultra Wolf, Evan Nudie, Trevor R., Alexander Thaler, Ryan Lubin, and Jeff Lamb, we are eternally grateful for this small segment of land for us to toil and work. To our knights, Ariane McCarthy, Daniel Sutton, Ants Are Still Running the World, Coulter Smith, Val 9000, Jenna Tall, Dark Puppy, Quiet One 85, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, Multimondi, Trevor Janis, Lemmy 101, Anthropophojack, Saren 42, Chronic to Hemphog, Catherine, Bone Jenny, Radical Maniac, Ramona Costa, Jimmy Bignuts, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Political Puppy, Andreas Chiringuito, Zach Christensen, Jopi, Josh Mickelson, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We raise our glasses, we raise our swords, and we salute you, our friends. And to Lance, you are the wind beneath my wings.